The November fog pressed against the windows of Baker Street like a living thing, its tendrils creeping through every crack and crevice until the familiar gaslight seemed little more than pale phantoms dancing in the gloom. I had arrived at 221B to find my friend Sherlock Holmes in one of his contemplative moods, his lean figure silhouetted against the fireplace as he examined a peculiar specimen beneath his magnifying glass. The comfortable disorder of our sitting-room newspapers scattered across the Persian carpet, chemical apparatus gleaming on the side table, the violin resting against its familiar chair spoke of an evening's quiet industry interrupted. "Watson," Holmes said without lifting his gaze from his work, "what would you make of a woman who commands more fear in death than she ever did in life?" His voice carried that particular note of intellectual hunger that I had come to associate with cases that truly captured his imagination. Before I could formulate a response, the sharp jangle of our street bell cut through the evening stillness, followed by the familiar tread of Mrs. Hudson's footsteps upon the stairs. Inspector Lestrade entered, with the fog still clinging to his coat, his usually composed demeanor betraying an uncharacteristic agitation. He clutched a telegram in his gloved hand, and his keen eyes darted between Holmes and myself with barely concealed urgency. "Gentlemen, I come to you with a matter that has left Scotland Yard utterly baffled," he began, settling his slight frame into the chair opposite Holmes. "Sir Erasmus Blackstone, the iron magnate, was found dead this morning in his private study at Blackwood Manor. The room was locked from within, every window barred and sealed, yet the circumstances of his death defy all rational explanation." Holmes finally looked up from his specimen, his grey eyes immediately sharpening with interest. "Indeed? And what makes this particular locked room so extraordinary, Lestrade? Surely the Yard has encountered such puzzles before." "It's not merely the locked room, Holmes," Lestrade replied, his voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial whisper. The man died of apparent terror, his face frozen in an expression of absolute horror, yet there wasn't a mark upon him. No sign of violence, no indication of struggle. But here's the peculiar thing. The servants swear they saw Lady Agatha Blackstone walking the corridors that very night. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November air. But surely that's impossible, Lestrade. "Lady Agatha died 3 months ago." "Precisely, Doctor. Yet no fewer than 4 witnesses claim to have seen the Iron Widow herself. That's what they called her in the East End. You know, for her ruthless business practices and the way she crushed anyone who opposed her husband's empire. They describe her distinctive silhouette, her mourning dress, even the peculiar way she carried her walking stick. The head butler, a man of unshakable nerves who served the family for 30 years, collapsed in a dead faint after encountering her in the library. Holmes rose from his chair with that fluid grace that marked all his movements, his fingers already reaching for his pipe. "Most intriguing. And the scene of Sir Erasmus's death, what physical evidence remains? That's where it becomes truly bizarre," Lestrade continued, consulting his notebook. The study reeked of an acrid, metallic odor, almost like burnt iron. There were fine metal filings scattered near his desk, and the safe stood open, though nothing appeared to have been taken save for a mourning locket containing Lady Agatha's portrait. Someone had scratched a message into the safe's surface. "The widow claims what is hers." The wind rattled our windows as Holmes began his characteristic pacing before the fireplace, his mind already working through the implications. A locked room, a death by terror, metallic residue, and the apparent manifestation of a woman 3 months dead. Tell me, Lestrade, what was the nature of the Blackstones' marriage? Were they a devoted couple? "Hardly," Lestrade snorted. "Lady Agatha was known for her iron will and sharp tongue. Some whispered that she was the true power behind the Blackstone fortune, that her husband was merely her instrument. Her death was sudden heart failure, the physician said, but there were those who wondered if Sir Erasmus might have finally found the courage to free himself from her dominance." Holmes paused in his pacing, a thin smile playing about his lips. How fascinating that she should choose this moment to return from beyond the grave. Watson, fetch your coat and medical bag. It appears the Iron Widow has one final business transaction to complete. The handsome cab lurched into motion, its wheels finding purchase on the fog-slicked cobblestones as we departed Baker Street into the increasingly oppressive November night. Holmes sat opposite me in contemplative silence, his sharp profile occasionally illuminated by the passing gaslight, while Lestrade occupied the corner seat with the air of a man wrestling with forces beyond his comprehension. The rhythmic clatter of hooves against stone provided a steady counterpoint to my racing thoughts as we made our way through London's labyrinthine streets toward Blackwood Manor. "Tell me, Watson," Holmes said suddenly, breaking the silence that had settled over our small party, "what do you know of metallurgy and its applications in modern industry?" His question seemed entirely disconnected from our current mission. Yet, I had learned long ago that my friend's seemingly random inquiries invariably held profound significance to the matter at hand. "Only what my medical training provided," I replied, watching his lean fingers drum against his knee in that familiar pattern that indicated deep thought. "Basic chemistry, the properties of various metals in relation to human physiology, some understanding of their industrial applications. Why do you ask?" Holmes leaned forward, his grey eyes gleaming with that intensity I had come to associate with the early stages of his most complex cases. "Iron filings in a locked room, my dear fellow," the metallic odour that Lestrade described, the apparent manifestation of a woman known throughout London as the Iron Widow. "These are not coincidental details." He paused, glancing at the inspector, who was studying his notes with renewed interest. Lady Agatha Blackstone inherited and expanded the largest ironworks in northern England. Her understanding of metallurgy, of the properties and applications of various metals, would have been considerable indeed. The fog grew thicker as we travelled beyond the familiar confines of central London, transforming the familiar cityscape into something alien and threatening. Gas lamps appeared as ghostly halos in the mist, casting insufficient light upon the increasingly desolate streets. Each jolt of the carriage seemed to heighten the sense of foreboding that had settled upon us like a physical weight, and I found myself pulling my coat closer against the penetrating chill that seemed to seep into my very bones. As our destination drew near, the urban landscape gave way to the sprawling estates of Hampstead, where London's industrial magnates had built their grand houses away from the smoke and grime of their factories. Blackwood Manor materialized from the fog like some Gothic cathedral, its imposing silhouette rising against the night sky with an almost supernatural presence. The wrought iron gates stood open, flanked by gas lamps that cast dancing shadows across the gravel drive, and even from our position in the cab, I could sense an atmosphere of unease that seemed to emanate from the very stones of the building. A figure emerged from the shadows as we approached the front entrance, a tall, gaunt man in butler's attire, whose face bore the unmistakable pallor of recent shock. His hands trembled visibly as he opened the door, and I noticed how his eyes darted nervously toward the upper floors of the house, as though he expected some unwelcome visitor to appear at any moment. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said in a voice barely above a whisper, his words forming small clouds in the frigid air. "I am Pemberton, the head butler. Inspector Lestrade informed us of your arrival. I must warn you, gentlemen, there have been further disturbances since the inspector's earlier visit this afternoon." Holmes raised an eyebrow with keen interest, his entire demeanor sharpening like a blade being drawn from its sheath. "Indeed? What manner of disturbances, Mr. Pemberton?" The butler's carefully maintained composure began to crack visibly, years of professional training warring with very human terror. "The sound of footsteps in the upper corridors, sir. The same measured pace that Lady Agatha used when she walked these halls, always favoring her left foot due to an old injury. And there's something else, something that has shaken even the most steadfast members of our staff." We followed Pemberton through a grand foyer, dominated by dark mahogany paneling and ancestral portraits that seemed to watch our every movement with cold, disapproving eyes. The house carried the oppressive weight of old money and older secrets, its very atmosphere thick with decades of accumulated tension and barely suppressed conflict. As we passed beneath a crystal chandelier that cast prismatic shadows across the Persian carpet, I could detect that same acrid, metallic odor that Lestrade had described, though here it was fainter, almost subliminal. Pemberton led us to a massive oil painting that commanded the central wall of the main hallway. The portrait depicted Lady Agatha Blackstone in her prime, a woman of perhaps 40 years, with steel-grey hair, pulled severely back, and eyes that seemed to burn with an inner fire that transcended the mere application of paint and canvas. She wore a black silk dress adorned with jet beads, and her pale hands rested upon an ornate walking stick, topped with what appeared to be an iron rose, worked in exquisite detail. But what drew our immediate attention was the fresh scratch that had been carved across the canvas, a jagged line that ran from her throat to her heart with deliberate precision. "This was discovered at dawn," Pemberton said, his voice quavering despite his obvious efforts to maintain professional composure. "The night watchman swears he heard the sound of metal against canvas sometime after midnight, but when he investigated with his lantern, he found no one in the hallway, only that same acrid scent that now fills Sir Erasmus's study, and the portrait thus defaced." Holmes approached the damaged painting with his magnifying glass, examining the torn canvas with the meticulous care of a surgeon studying a particularly complex wound. The silence stretched taut as he conducted his investigation, broken only by the distant ticking of a grandfather clock and the soft whisper of settling embers from a nearby fireplace. "Fascinating," he murmured at last, straightening to his full height. "The cut was made with a sharp instrument, something with a very fine edge and considerable strength behind it. Notice how clean the tear appears. Watson, this was not done in haste or anger, but with deliberate, calculated precision." He turned to face the butler with that penetrating stare that had unnerved countless suspects over the years. "Mr. Pemberton, I should very much like to examine Sir Erasmus's study now, and I shall need to speak with each member of the household staff who claims to have witnessed Lady Agatha's, to return." Pemberton led us through the manor's shadowed corridors, our footsteps muffled by thick Persian runners that seemed to absorb sound itself. The metallic scent grew more pronounced with each step, creating an almost palpable atmosphere that pressed against us like a living thing. Electric lights had been installed throughout the house, their harsh illumination casting stark shadows in corners where gaslight would have provided gentler warmth, and I found myself longing for the familiar comfort of our Baker Street quarters. "Sir Erasmus's study lies just ahead," Pemberton whispered, producing a heavy brass key from his waistcoat. "The room has remained sealed since Inspector Lestrade's initial examination. I confess that none of the staff has ventured near this wing since the discovery, sir. The very air seems unwholesome." Holmes paused before the imposing mahogany door, his keen eyes studying the elaborate Brummer lock with practiced familiarity. "Quite sophisticated for a private residence," he observed, running his fingers along the brass mechanism. "Virtually impossible to pick without considerable expertise." "Who possessed keys to this room, Pemberton?" "Only Sir Erasmus himself, sir. He was most particular about his privacy, especially during business hours. Even Lady Agatha, during her lifetime, required permission to enter when he was working." The door swung open with a prolonged creak that seemed to reverberate through the house's very foundations, revealing a chamber that spoke eloquently of wealth, power, and carefully guarded secrets. Sir Erasmus's study was a testament to his industrial empire. Steel engravings of his factories adorned the walls, samples of refined metals displayed in glass cases like precious gems, and behind the massive oak desk stood an imposing safe whose open door gaped like a wound. Holmes moved immediately to examine the safe, his magnifying glass revealing the scratched message Lestrade had described. "The widow claims what is hers," he read aloud, tracing the deep grooves with his finger. "Remarkable craftsmanship, These letters were carved with deliberate precision into steel, not the work of an amateur or someone acting in passionate haste. I approached the Persian rug where Sir Erasmus had met his end, noting the position described in Lestrade's report. The man had been found, slumped forward across his desk, face frozen in absolute terror, yet bearing no visible wounds or signs of struggle. The acrid metallic odor was strongest here, creating an oppressive atmosphere that made breathing difficult. "Watson," Holmes called softly, kneeling near the safe space. "Observe these metallic particles." He indicated fine, glittering filings scattered across the carpet with unusual precision. Using his tweezers, he collected several specimens in a small vial. Not merely iron, note the distinct sheen, the peculiar density. Their distribution is highly localized, suggesting deliberate placement rather than accidental dispersion. He then examined the room's security with methodical care. The heavy door had indeed been locked from within, its massive bolt thrown, key still in place. The windows were secured with iron bars outside and heavy latches within, all showing undisturbed layers of dust. Yet something had caught his attention near the fireplace, a small, almost imperceptible scorch mark on the carpet's edge, far from where the body lay. "Tell me, Pemberton," Holmes said, straightening from his examination. "Was Sir Erasmus in the habit of working with electrical apparatus? The new bell system Lady Agatha installed. For instance, where are the batteries housed?" The butler's face paled further. "In a closet near the servants' stairs, sir." Lady Agatha insisted on the most modern conveniences. She had considerable knowledge of such matters, having overseen the electrification of several factory operations. Holmes produced his pocket compass, watching with evident satisfaction as the needle wavered erratically near the desk. "Magnetism," he murmured to me. "Coils and currents, Watson." Our Iron Widow understood more than the forging of steel. She comprehended its electrical properties as well. A sudden commotion erupted from somewhere deep within the house. Raised voices, running footsteps, and what sounded distinctly like a woman's terrified scream. Pemberton gripped the doorframe, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "Dear God," he gasped. "She walks again." Holmes was already moving toward the corridor, his grey eyes alight with the thrill of pursuit. "Come, Watson, Lestrade. It appears our ghostly Lady Agatha has chosen to make another appearance, and this time we may observe her methods directly." We rushed through the darkened passages toward the disturbance, our footsteps thundering against marble floors as the servants' voices rose in a cacophony of supernatural terror from the depths of Blackwood Manor. We descended rapidly through the manor's service corridors, following the sounds of distress toward the sprawling kitchen quarters where the household staff had gathered in evident terror. The narrow passage amplified our footsteps against the stone walls, and with each step, that distinctive metallic scent grew more pronounced, creating an oppressive atmosphere that seemed to press against us like a physical presence. Electric lights flickered erratically overhead, casting dancing shadows that transformed familiar surroundings into something altogether more sinister. The commotion led us into the main scullery, where we discovered a young housemaid collapsed against a stack of copper pots, her face drained of all color and her eyes rolled back in unconsciousness. The robust cook knelt beside her with smelling salts, while several other servants huddled together near the great stone hearth, their usual composure shattered by whatever supernatural visitation they believed they had witnessed. "She came right through that wall." "She did," gasped the cook, pointing with a trembling finger toward the far corner of the scullery. Lady Agatha herself, dressed in mourning black, walking with that terrible iron-topped stick of hers. But her face, gentleman, white as marble it was, and her eyes burned like coals in a furnace. Holmes immediately moved to examine the unconscious girl, checking her pulse with practiced efficiency before turning his attention to her clenched fist. With gentle pressure, he opened her fingers to reveal a small silver locket, identical in design to the one missing from Sir Erasmus's safe, though this specimen appeared tarnished and bore signs of recent handling. Curious, he murmured, passing the locket to Lestrade while producing his magnifying glass. No signs of physical contact or struggle, Watson. The shock appears to have been purely psychological, yet observe the evidence she clutched so tightly. He knelt to examine the flagstone floor where the girl had fallen, immediately detecting the same metallic particles we had discovered in the study above. Pemberton, Holmes said, rising with that fluid grace that marked his movements. I require immediate access to the electrical apparatus that Lady Agatha installed throughout the house. The distribution of these metallic filings suggests a deliberate pattern, and I suspect we shall find the source of our ghostly manifestations in the realm of applied science rather than supernatural phenomena. The butler led us through a maze of service passages to a heavy door marked Electrical Room, Authorized Personnel Only. The metallic scent intensified dramatically as we approached, and I could feel an almost tangible energy in the air that made the hair on my arms rise with electromagnetic tension. Inside, we discovered an elaborate array of galvanic cells, induction coils, and mechanical apparatus that far exceeded the requirements of a simple bell system. Remarkable, Holmes breathed, examining a particularly sophisticated electromagnetic device. Lady Agatha was clearly a woman of considerable scientific knowledge. These electromagnets could generate fields of tremendous intensity, and this induction apparatus could produce electrical currents powerful enough to magnetize iron objects at considerable distance. As he spoke, Holmes produced his pocket compass, watching with evident satisfaction as the needles spun wildly in the electromagnetic field. The instrument became completely unreliable, its needle oscillating between magnetic north and the powerful artificial fields that permeated the chamber. But Holmes, I interjected, what possible connection could electrical apparatus have with ghostly apparitions? Surely you don't suggest that electromagnetic fields can create visual hallucinations? Not hallucinations, Watson, but illusions, carefully crafted by someone with intimate knowledge of both electrical principles and human psychology. Examine a complex arrangement of copper wiring that disappeared into the walls and ceiling. Observe these conductors. They form a network throughout the house, far more extensive than required for simple bell service. And note this curious apparatus. He indicated a device that resembled a large electromagnetic coil connected to what appeared to be a projection mechanism. Fine copper wires led from the apparatus through carefully drilled holes in the wall, while a small reservoir contained a phosphorescent substance that glowed faintly in the gaslight. Pemberton, Holmes continued. Who maintained these electrical systems for Lady Agatha? I assume she required technical assistance for such sophisticated installations. Mr. Horace Rook, sir, the butler replied with evident reluctance. He served as Lady Agatha's machinist and electrical engineer, a brilliant man, though somewhat eccentric in his methods. There is also Mr. Felix Larch, Sir Erasmus's private secretary, who kept the keys and accounts for all household systems. Holmes nodded with satisfaction, making mental notes of both names. And where might we find these gentlemen at present? Mr. Rook maintains workshops in the carriage house, sir, though he has not slept in the main house since Lady Agatha's passing. Mr. Larch departed immediately after Sir Erasmus's funeral, claiming urgent business in London, though he was expected to return today to settle the estate accounts. At that moment, the house's electrical system began to fluctuate with increasing intensity, creating a stroboscopic effect that transformed our surroundings into something from a fever dream. The humming from the electromagnetic apparatus rose to an almost unbearable pitch, and somewhere in the distance, we could hear the unmistakable sound of measured footsteps, the distinctive gait that favored the left foot, exactly as the servants had described Lady Agatha's walk. She comes again, whispered Pemberton, his professional composure finally cracking completely. Dear God, she walks among us still. Holmes's grey eyes gleamed with the thrill of intellectual pursuit rather than supernatural dread. Indeed she does, Pemberton. but I suspect our Iron Widow is far more flesh and blood than spirit. Come, Watson. Lestrade, it appears our mysterious lady has chosen to make another performance, and this time we shall observe her methods with the clear light of scientific inquiry rather than the shadows of superstitious fear. We ascended rapidly toward the source of the footsteps, the electromagnetic humming growing more intense with each step as the house's electrical system pulsed in rhythm with the ghostly manifestation above. Holmes moved with predatory precision through the flickering shadows, his keen eyes studying the ornate ceiling moldings and wall fixtures rather than pursuing the apparition directly. The metallic scent had become almost overwhelming, creating an atmosphere so charged with electromagnetic energy that I could taste copper on my tongue. "Watson, observe the pattern," Holmes whispered as we reached the main gallery. 2 beats, pause. 1 dragging step precisely as the servants described Lady Agatha's distinctive gait. Yet note how the electric lights dim and brighten in perfect synchronization with each footfall. The measured tread led us toward the portrait gallery, where that same damaged painting of Lady Agatha commanded the central wall. As we approached, a figure materialized at the far end of the corridor, draped in mourning black, a veil drawn low, the iron rose atop her walking stick, gleaming with phosphorescent fire. For a terrifying moment, she appeared to gaze directly at us through the flickering electrical haze, before continuing her predetermined route with that uncanny, gliding motion. "Glass and smoke, Inspector," Holmes said sharply as Lestrade reached for his veiled revolver. "Put that away, unless you mean to perforate expensive wallpaper." He moved not toward the apparition but sideways, examining the wall panels with his magnifying glass. The spectral figure progressed several yards with that distinctive limp, then dissolved like morning mist, leaving only the echo of footsteps receding into supernatural silence. Holmes was upon the spot immediately, extracting with his penknife a thread so fine it might have been spider's silk. He held it to the gaslight, where it gleamed with metallic luster. "Tensioned copper wire, Watson, drawn across the corridor at precisely the height of a woman's silhouette. And observe this minute roller mechanism sunk into the skirting board." I knelt beside him, detecting the faint odor of phosphorus mixed with that persistent metallic scent. On the polished floor lay an almost invisible film that emitted a cold, lambent glow when Holmes shaded it with his hand. "Phosphorescent compound, painted upon gauze," he explained. "Combined with carefully directed electromagnetic projection, one could create a most convincing ghostly manifestation." "But the footsteps, Holmes," I protested. "Surely those cannot be mechanical." He tapped the wainscoting, producing a muted response from within 2 beats. Pause, 1 dragging stroke. Pressing along the paneling until a section yielded, he revealed a narrow cavity containing an intricate clockwork mechanism. Its tiny hammers struck leather pads in perfect imitation of Lady Agatha's distinctive gait, while copper wires snaked through carefully drilled holes toward the electrical room below. "Remarkable engineering," Holmes murmured with evident admiration. "The electromagnets beneath the floorboards interact with metallic threads in the gauze, creating the illusion of movement, while the projection apparatus provides visual substance to what would otherwise be mere shadow play." Lestrade whistled low. "So Rook is our man, then. This contraption bears the hallmarks of a skilled machinist." "Indeed. But I suspect, Mr. Rook serves as instrument rather than orchestrator." Holmes produced a small leather journal he had discovered near the mechanism, its pages filled with meticulous diagrams and calculations in a distinctly feminine hand. "These designs are Lady Agatha's own work. Inspector, she understood not merely the forging of iron, but its electromagnetic properties as well. This entire system was conceived by the Iron Widow herself." As we examined the apparatus more closely, voices erupted from the courtyard below, the sound of carriage wheels on gravel and Pemberton's agitated tones greeting a late arrival. Holmes moved to the window, his grey eyes sharpening with satisfaction as he observed a tall, spare gentleman alighting from a brougham, his movements betraying the nervous precision of a man accustomed to managing other people's secrets. "Mr. Felix Larch, I presume," Holmes said, quietly. Lady Agatha's private secretary, returned at last from his urgent business in London. How convenient that he should arrive just as we discover the true nature of his mistress's final performance. The electromagnetic apparatus below suddenly surged to life once more, its mechanical symphony resuming with renewed intensity, as though the Iron Widow herself had sensed the arrival of her most important audience member and prepared to deliver her most spectacular manifestation yet. "Come, Watson, Lestrade," Holmes said, already moving toward the stairs. "I believe our ghostly lady is about to reveal the true purpose behind this elaborate theatrical production, and Mr. Larch holds the final piece of our puzzle." We descended swiftly toward the main entrance, where Felix Larch stood, removing his rain-dampened coat with the precise movements of a man accustomed to managing every detail of his appearance. Holmes's keen eyes immediately catalogued the secretary's condition, the violet ink stain upon his right cuff, the fine copper wire clinging to his coat sleeve, the nervous tremor in his pale hands as he clutched an overstuffed leather portfolio. The electromagnetic disturbances from above seemed to affect him profoundly, his gaze darting repeatedly toward the ceiling as the ghostly footsteps resumed their measured cadence. "Mr. Larch," Holmes said with deceptive courtesy, stepping forward as Pemberton admitted the secretary to the foyer. "Your timing is remarkably fortuitous. We have just witnessed another of Lady Agatha's posthumous performances, complete with electromagnetic accompaniment." Larch's carefully composed features betrayed a flicker of genuine alarm. "Electromagnetic? I'm afraid I don't understand, Mr. Holmes. The servants' tales of supernatural manifestations seemed mere hysteria until—" He stopped abruptly as the lights flickered in perfect synchronization with the phantom footsteps above, the metallic scent growing more pronounced with each spectral stride. "Until you witnessed the evidence yourself," Holmes completed smoothly. "Most interesting that you should carry copper wire upon your person, Mr. Larch, and bear the stains of chemical compounds upon your clothing. The violet ink, for instance, commonly used in electrical experimentation when mixed with metallic salts." The secretary's portfolio slipped from nerveless fingers, scattering papers across the marble floor. Among the documents, I glimpsed technical diagrams, electrical schematics, and correspondence bearing Lady Agatha's distinctive letterhead. Holmes knelt immediately, his magnifying glass revealing intricate drawings of electromagnetic apparatus and detailed specifications for phosphorescent compounds. "Curious reading material for a man settling legal affairs," Holmes observed, selecting a particular document. "This appears to be Lady Agatha's own design for an electromagnetic projection system, complete with calculations for optimal wire placement and induction coil positioning. Hardly the usual province of estate management." Larch's composure cracked visibly. "Lady Agatha was a woman of extraordinary intellect, Mr. Holmes. Her technical interests required careful documentation, financial arrangements for materials and equipment. I merely handled the administrative aspects of her projects, including the procurement of phosphorescent materials and metallic compounds," Holmes pressed, indicating another scattered document. "And the coordination with Mr. Rook's mechanical expertise. Your administrative duties appear remarkably comprehensive, Mr. Larch." The electromagnetic humming intensified dramatically, causing the crystal chandelier to chime with harmonic resonance. The phantom footsteps grew louder, approaching the main hall with that distinctive rhythm: 2 beats, pause, 1 dragging step. Larch instinctively stepped backward, his face draining of color as the spectral manifestation drew near. "The locket, Mr. Larch," Holmes said sharply, his voice cutting through the rising electromagnetic symphony. "The mourning locket that disappeared from Sir Erasmus's safe and materialized in the housemaid's hand. You know its significance, don't you? What did Lady Agatha conceal within that seemingly innocent piece of jewelry?" "I cannot," Larch began. But his words were cut short as a violent surge of electrical energy coursed through the house's wiring. The lights blazed with painful intensity before dimming to an ominous glow, and the metallic scent became almost unbearable. A tall figure emerged from the service corridor. Horace Rook, the machinist, his dark clothing bearing the oil stains of recent mechanical work. "Mr. Rook," Lestrade announced grimly, found lurking near the electrical apparatus, claims he was merely maintaining the equipment. Holmes examined Rook's hands with professional interest, noting the fresh, burn marks upon his fingertips and the phosphorescent residue beneath his nails. "The apparatus has been active recently, Mr. Rook. Your mistress's final performance requires considerable technical expertise to maintain." "Lady Agatha's designs, sir," Rook replied with mechanical precision. "I am merely the instrument of her will. The system operates according to her specifications, triggered by predetermined conditions." Holmes demanded. But before Rook could respond, the electromagnetic field reached critical intensity. The air itself seemed to shimmer with invisible energy, and somewhere in the distance, we could hear the distinct sound of metal grinding against metal, the unmistakable signature of Lady Agatha's iron-topped walking stick against the marble floors. "She comes for what is rightfully hers," Larch whispered. His professional composure finally shattered completely. "The codicil, the final instructions I never meant for. Sir Erasmus too." His confession was interrupted as the spectral figure of Lady Agatha materialized at the far end of the hall, her phosphorescent form more substantial than ever before. The iron rose atop her walking stick, gleaming with cold fire as she began her inexorable approach toward the trembling secretary. Holmes stepped directly into the path of the advancing specter, his lean form cutting through the electromagnetic field with scientific precision rather than supernatural dread. As Lady Agatha's phosphorescent figure drew within arm's reach, her iron-topped walking stick gleaming with cold fire, Holmes reached toward a concealed mechanism embedded within the ornate wainscoting. His fingers found a small brass lever disguised as decorative molding, and with a decisive motion, he threw the hidden switch. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The electromagnetic humming that had permeated the house ceased abruptly, the lights stabilized to their normal gaslight glow, and the spectral Lady Agatha wavered like smoke before dissolving entirely into nothingness. Only the lingering scent of phosphorus and the faint echo of mechanical clockwork winding down in the walls remained as evidence of her supernatural performance. "Most impressive theater, Mr. Larch," Holmes observed calmly, turning his penetrating gaze upon the trembling secretary. Lady Agatha's posthumous revenge was indeed orchestrated with considerable scientific ingenuity, but I believe the time has come to examine the true motivation behind this elaborate charade. Larch staggered against the marble pillar, his carefully maintained facade crumbling as completely as his mistress's ghostly manifestation. "How did you discover the master control? The system was designed to be undetectable." "Elementary," Holmes replied, producing Lady Agatha's technical journal from his coat. "Your late mistress documented every aspect of her electromagnetic apparatus with meticulous precision. Switch locations, timing mechanisms, chemical formulations, all recorded in her distinctive hand. She was indeed a woman of remarkable scientific acumen, but also of calculated vindictiveness." Rook stood rigid under Lestrade's watchful eye, his oil-stained hands trembling with the aftermath of electromagnetic exposure. "Lady Agatha's final instructions," he said in a voice devoid of emotion. "The system was programmed to activate upon specific conditions that Sir Erasmus fulfilled perfectly. The codicil," Holmes continued relentlessly, his grey eyes reflecting the dying gaslight with predatory intensity. "The document that so terrified Sir Erasmus that his weak heart could not bear the revelation. Tell us, Mr. Larch, what secret provision did Lady Agatha embed within her final testament?" The secretary's composure shattered completely. "She knew," he whispered, clutching his scattered papers with desperate intensity. Sir Erasmus's plans to remarry within months of her death. Miss Eleanor Vance, a woman 30 years his junior, whom he had been secretly courting even before his wife's passing. I watched Holmes's expression sharpen with intellectual satisfaction as the pieces arranged themselves into their proper configuration. And Lady Agatha's response to this betrayal? A secret codicil, Larch continued miserably, stipulating that should Sir Erasmus remarry within 2 years of her death, the entire Blackstone fortune would revert to a charitable trust for industrial workers. Every share, every property, every asset, lost forever. Evidence of Sir Erasmus's embezzlement from the workers' pension fund, documentation of unsafe practices that led to the Hartwell mining disaster. Lady Agatha had been collecting evidence for years, insurance against any attempt to diminish her control. Holmes nodded grimly. And the locket contained not merely a sentimental portrait, but a photographically reduced copy of these damaging documents. When Sir Erasmus discovered the codicil, while preparing to announce his engagement, the psychological shock combined with Lady Agatha's supernatural visitations proved fatal to his weakened constitution. The electromagnetic apparatus was triggered by the locket's removal from the proteus. Safe, Rook added mechanically. Lady Agatha anticipated every possibility. The moment Sir Erasmus attempted to destroy the evidence, her spirit would manifest to claim what was rightfully hers not through violence, but through precisely calculated terror. Murder by supernatural theatre, Holmes concluded with cold certainty. Lady Agatha's final demonstration that even death could not diminish her dominion over those who had served her empire. The Iron Widow's ultimate revenge, executed through electromagnetic precision and psychological manipulation. The confession hung in the air like the metallic scent that still permeated the manor. While somewhere in the walls, the last of Lady Agatha's mechanical clockwork fell silent. Yet I sensed that Holmes had not yet revealed all the secrets hidden within Blackwood Manor's electromagnetic heart. Holmes stood motionless in the aftermath of the dissolved specter, his grey eyes scanning the marble floor, where Lady Agatha's phosphorescent form had moments before commanded our terrified attention. The silence that followed her disappearance seemed more oppressive than her supernatural presence, as though the very absence of electromagnetic energy created a vacuum that demanded truth. With characteristic precision, he knelt to examine the faint traces left by the ghostly performance, his magnifying glass revealing details that would escape ordinary observation. "Most illuminating, Mr. Larch," Holmes said quietly, rising with several metallic particles glinting between his fingers. "But I suspect Lady Agatha's final performance required more than mechanical precision, it demanded human enhancement." He moved with purposeful strides toward the portrait gallery, where that same damaged painting of the Iron Widow commanded the central wall. Pemberton. Lady Agatha's walking stick, the iron-topped cane with the rose finial. Where is it housed? The butler's face drained of color. Well, it vanished from its stand the morning Sir Erasmus was discovered. "Sir, we searched the entire house, but found no trace." Holmes's expression sharpened with predatory satisfaction. "Then it remains within these walls, serving a purpose far more significant than mere locomotion." He examined the scratched portrait with renewed intensity, his lens revealing microscopic iron filings embedded within the torn canvas. This damage was inflicted not by spectral fury, Mr. Larch, but by a very real instrument, one bearing the distinctive composition of Lady Agatha's iron rose. Moving with fluid grace, Holmes approached the fausse, ornate wainscoting beneath the portrait, his fingers tracing the elaborate carved molding until they discovered a nearly invisible seam. With gentle pressure, a narrow panel swung inward, revealing a concealed recess from which he withdrew Lady Agatha's walking stick. The iron rose atop gleamed with more than mere polish. A faint phosphorescent residue clung to its petals, and copper wires as fine as spider silk emerged from its base. "Remarkable engineering," Holmes murmured, examining the rose with professional admiration. "Not merely decorative, but functional, a concealed reservoir for chemical compounds and electrical apparatus. With careful manipulation, the iron rose unscrewed to reveal a hollow cavity lined with waxed paper. Within lay a tiny glass cylinder, no larger than a thimble, and a tightly rolled strip of photographic film. Holmes held the glass to the gaslight, revealing minute script compressed through photographic reduction, the Stanhope lens technique, that allowed entire documents to be concealed within seemingly innocent objects. Lady Agatha's insurance policy, he announced, passing the cylinder to Lestrade. Complete documentation of Sir Erasmus's embezzlement from the Workers' Pension Fund, evidence of the unsafe practices that caused the Hartwell mining disaster, and detailed records of his secret courtship with Miss Eleanor Vance. But the metallic filings, Holmes, I interjected, studying the particles scattered throughout the house. Their distribution suggests deliberate placement rather than accidental dispersion. Precisely, Watson. These particles possess a specific composition designed to enhance electromagnetic fields and intensify the sensory assault. Holmes fixed Larch with that penetrating stare that had unnerved countless suspects. Lady Agatha's system was ingenious, but it required human administration, someone to monitor Sir Erasmus's activities, to activate the apparatus at precisely the most devastating psychological moments, and to ensure its effects proved fatal rather than merely terrifying. Larch's carefully maintained composure finally cracked completely. Lady Agatha commanded absolute loyalty, he whispered, his hands trembling as he clutched his scattered documents. Even in death, her will demanded obedience. Sir Erasmus's betrayal, his plans to remarry within months, to expose her final revenge as mere theatrical trickery, such treachery could not be permitted. So you enhanced her electromagnetic apparatus, Holmes concluded with cold certainty. The metallic compounds to intensify the magnetic field, the precise timing to ensure maximum cardiac disruption, the careful placement of evidence to guarantee discovery. Lady Agatha designed the system for psychological pressure. Larch, but you transformed it into an instrument of murder. The confession hung in the air like the metallic scent that still permeated the manor, while Holmes prepared to reveal the final, most damning aspect of the Iron Widow's posthumous conspiracy. The weight of Larch's confession settled upon the marble foyer like the metallic dust that had permeated every corner of Blackwood Manor, yet Holmes's expression suggested that even this admission represented merely the surface of a far deeper conspiracy. The detective moved with characteristic precision toward the trembling secretary, his grey eyes reflecting an intensity that seemed to pierce through years of carefully constructed deception and misplaced loyalty. Your devotion to Lady Agatha's memory is evident, Mr. Larch, Holmes said with that deceptive gentleness that often preceded his most devastating revelations. But I suspect her final instructions were considerably more sophisticated than mere posthumous revenge. The electromagnetic apparatus, the precise timing of supernatural manifestations, the calculated psychological assault. All these elements suggest a conspiracy that transformed scientific ingenuity into cold-blooded murder. From his waistcoat, Holmes produced the small vial containing those metallic particles we had discovered throughout the house, holding them to the gaslight, where they gleamed with an almost sinister luster. Consider these filings. Watson, not merely iron dust as one might expect from Lady Agatha's industrial empire, but a precise alloy of iron and nickel, chosen specifically for its superior ferromagnetic properties. Lady Agatha's original designs, as documented in her technical journal, called for simple atmospheric iron to enhance the visual effects of her projected specter. But you, Mr. Larch, introduced this particular composition. Holmes paused, allowing the implication to penetrate the consciousness of everyone present before continuing with relentless logic. These enhanced particles, strategically distributed throughout Sir Erasmus's study, served as conductors and intensifiers for the electromagnetic field generated by Lady Agatha's apparatus. They created not merely that acrid metallic odor the servants described, but a localized, high-intensity electromagnetic pulse designed to affect the human cardiovascular system. The scorch mark near the fireplace, which I observed during our initial investigation, marked the point of greatest electromagnetic discharge, positioned precisely where Sir Erasmus would be seated when terror overcame his weakened heart. Moving with fluid grace toward the study door, Holmes gestured for us to follow him back to the scene of Sir Erasmus's death. "I propose a demonstration, gentlemen, that will illuminate both the ingenuity of Lady Agatha's original design and the deadly modifications introduced by her faithful secretary." In the study, Holmes closed the windows and verified the position of the key in the lock, his movements carrying that theatrical precision that marked his most brilliant expositions. From his coat, he produced a small coil of insulated wire, which he deftly connected to terminals concealed beneath the massive oak desk. "Lady Agatha's electrical network extends far beyond mere bell service," Holmes explained, his fingers working with practiced efficiency. "Observe, Lestrade. I shall remain within this room while you permit the door to close naturally. Do not touch the bolt or key." Before I could voice my concern for his safety, the heavy door swung shut with its own weight. Holmes, visible through the keyhole, raised his hand in casual salute before touching two copper wires together. A sharp, metallic click emanated from within the lock mechanism, followed by the heavy thud of the bolt shooting home with mechanical precision. The key, which moments before had rested in neutral position, turned of its own accord as though guided by invisible hands. "Electromagnetic manipulation of the lock mechanism," Holmes announced as he reopened the door from within, a thin smile playing about his lips. A carefully positioned electromagnet adjacent to the warded tumbler, combined with a spring-loaded mechanism to throw the bolt when the magnetic field collapses. Mr. Rook's mechanical expertise provided the timing relay that allowed the murderer to depart before the room secured itself, as if by supernatural intervention. Rook, who had remained silent under Lestrade's watchful guard, suddenly stepped forward, with the mechanical precision that characterized all his movements. "I built what my instructions required," he said in a voice barely above a whisper, his oil-stained hands trembling with the weight of confession. "But I never intended for a man to die, Mr. Holmes. Mr. Larch possessed documents, evidence of my sister's supposed theft from the Northern Foundry's petty cash. He threatened her position, her reputation, her very livelihood, unless I enhanced Lady Agatha's apparatus according to his specifications." Holmes's expression softened, marginally as he studied the broken machinist. "Coercion through familial devotion, a time-honored method of ensuring compliance. Your sister serves as housekeeper at the Hartwell facility, does she not? The same mine where Lady Agatha's industrial reforms came too late to prevent that tragic collapse." "She is all the family I have left," Rook replied with quiet dignity. "When Mr. Larch showed me those forged documents suggesting she had embezzled funds meant for the miners' families, I could not risk her disgrace. Lady Agatha had been kind to us both. I believed I was serving her memory by following Mr. Larch's technical modifications." Holmes moved to the mantelpiece, where Lady Agatha's iron-topped walking stick rested like a scepter of technological dominion. With careful manipulation, he demonstrated how the iron rose unscrewed to reveal not one but two concealed compartments, the first containing the photographic evidence we had already discovered, the second housing a collection of steel wafers engraved with minute script. "Transfer documents," Holmes announced, examining the metallic plates with his magnifying glass. "Legal authorizations that would have allowed Mr. Larch to direct the charitable trust established by Lady Agatha's codicil. While Sir Erasmus faced financial ruin and public humiliation, his faithful secretary would have controlled one of England's largest industrial fortunes through these shadow instruments." Larch's carefully maintained composure finally shattered completely as the full scope of his conspiracy became apparent. "Lady Agatha understood the necessity of strong leadership," he whispered, his professional demeanor cracking like poorly tempered steel. Sir Erasmus would have squandered her life's work on frivolous pursuits and that vapid young woman. The trust required a steward who comprehended her vision for industrial reform. But you comprehended something else entirely, Mr. Larch, Holmes said with cold precision, moving closer until his penetrating gaze seemed to strip away the last vestiges of the secretary's deception. You understood that Lady Agatha's electromagnetic apparatus, designed for psychological manipulation, could be transformed into an instrument of murder through careful scientific enhancement. The iron-nickel alloy particles, the precisely timed electromagnetic pulses, the calculated exploitation of Sir Erasmus's cardiac weakness. These were your contributions to Lady Agatha's posthumous performance. Holmes paused, allowing the full weight of accusation to settle before delivering his final, devastating conclusion. Lady Agatha intended prolonged torment for her unfaithful husband, financial ruin, social disgrace, the gradual destruction of everything he valued. But you, Mr. Larch, transformed her elaborate revenge into swift execution, shrouded in supernatural mystery, to conceal your own ambitions for power and control. The confession that followed seemed to drain the very life from Larch's features, as he acknowledged not merely his guilt, but the betrayal of the woman whose memory he claimed to serve. In the end, the Iron Widow's final performance had indeed claimed what was rightfully hers, not through ghostly vengeance, but through the calculated application of electromagnetic science wielded by human greed and twisted loyalty. As Lestrade stepped forward with the handcuffs, the metallic scent that had permeated Blackwood Manor began to dissipate, leaving only the lingering echo of Lady Agatha's mechanical clockwork falling silent in the walls, a fitting requiem for a conspiracy that had transformed scientific genius into the instrument of cold-blooded murder. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the marble foyer with a finality that seemed to dispel the last vestiges of supernatural terror from Blackwood Manor. Lestrade secured the restraints around Felix Larch's wrists while the secretary stood with shoulders bowed beneath the weight of his confession, his carefully maintained professional demeanor finally shattered completely. The scattered papers from his portfolio lay strewn across the Persian carpet like the remnants of a conspiracy that had consumed both its architect and its executor. Holmes moved with characteristic precision to gather the crucial evidence: the glass cylinder containing Lady Agatha's photographic documentation, the steel wafers bearing the forged transfer documents, and the iron-topped walking stick that had served as both theatrical prop and technological marvel. "Inspector," he said quietly, passing the items to Lestrade with careful deliberation, "these artifacts represent not merely the instruments of murder, but a comprehensive system of posthumous control that extended far beyond Sir Erasmus's death." From his waistcoat, Holmes produced a small brass key that bore the distinctive patina of frequent handling. This was concealed within the Iron Rose's deepest compartment, alongside additional documentation that suggests Lady Agatha's surveillance extended throughout her industrial empire. Factory foremen, government inspectors, suppliers, all subject to her methodical collection of compromising information. Horace Rook watched the proceedings with the mechanical stillness that had characterized his every movement throughout our investigation. Yet I detected a flicker of hope in his tired eyes as Holmes approached him with an expression softer than I had witnessed all evening. "Mr. Rook," Holmes said with uncharacteristic gentleness, "your cooperation, albeit coerced, has been instrumental in exposing this conspiracy. The evidence regarding your sister's alleged embezzlement, I shall personally ensure that Inspector Lestrade investigates the veracity of those documents. If they prove to be forgeries, as I strongly suspect, your sister's good name will be restored." "Thank you, Mr. Holmes," Rook whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Lady Agatha's designs were extraordinary, but I never intended for such consequences. I merely followed her technical specifications, then Mr. Larch's enhancements. No man ever does when fear dictates action," Holmes replied with philosophical understanding. Your mechanical expertise served Lady Agatha's vision of posthumous justice, but Mr. Larch perverted that vision into an instrument of immediate murder and personal gain. As we prepared to depart, the great doors opened to admit a young woman cloaked against the November night, her refined features pale but resolute in the wavering gaslight. She hesitated as she observed the tableau of constables and servants, then steadied herself with visible courage. "I am Eleanor Vance," she announced to Lestrade with quiet dignity. "I received word that Sir Erasmus had died and that Mr. Larch had requested my presence to collect certain personal correspondence." Holmes's expression softened by a degree I had seldom witnessed. "Miss Vance, those letters will be returned when the law permits. Meanwhile, you should know that Sir Erasmus intended your happiness, however unworthily he may have pursued it during his wife's lifetime. His death lies not at your feet, but at the hands of those who transformed Lady Agatha's elaborate revenge into cold-blooded murder." A single tear traced the young woman's cheek as she curtsied with graceful composure. "Then may God forgive all of us," she whispered, allowing Pemberton to escort her from the hall with the protective courtesy that marked his years of faithful service. The necessary formalities consumed the remainder of the night: signatures, seizures, and the methodical cataloguing of Lady Agatha's electromagnetic apparatus. By dawn, the last of the mechanical contrivances had been rendered harmless, their copper wires and induction coils transformed from instruments of terror into mere evidence of scientific ingenuity corrupted by human ambition. Larch was conveyed to Scotland Yard under heavy guard, while Rooke accompanied Lestrade voluntarily to provide a complete account of his coercion and technical contributions. As we stood in the courtyard watching the carriages depart, the first pale thread of morning began to unstitch the fog above the iron gates, and that persistent metallic scent that had haunted Blackwood Manor seemed finally to disperse into the November air. The great house stood silent and still, its windows reflecting the dawn light like closed eyes, while the last echoes of Lady Agatha's mechanical clockwork fell silent within its walls. 2 evenings later, we sat once more before our familiar fire in Baker Street, the comfortable disorder of our sitting room offering blessed relief after the calculated terrors of Blackwood Manor. Holmes had maintained contemplative silence since dinner, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, while Lady Agatha's iron rose rested upon the mantelpiece beside his pipe like some conquered heraldic trophy. "It is a curious thing, Holmes," I remarked, studying the ornate walking stick that had concealed such technological sophistication, "how human ambition can twist even the most brilliant of minds. Lady Agatha's intellect, her mastery of industry and electromagnetic science, ultimately served only to perpetuate her control even from beyond the grave." Holmes stirred from his reverie, his grey eyes reflecting the firelight with that intensity I had come to associate with his most profound observations. "Ghosts, Watson, are most potent where there has been a failure of justice," he said with characteristic precision. "Lady Agatha attempted to make terror serve the function of law, while Mr. Savava Larch transformed that terror into an instrument of immediate death. Between them, miners lay unavenged, a young woman stands bereft, and a city that prides itself upon rational progress was prepared to credit phosphorescence and clockwork with supernatural authority." He rose with fluid grace, crossing to the mantelpiece to examine the iron rose in the lamplight, its metallic petals still bearing faint traces of phosphorescent residue. The true ghost in this affair was not Lady Agatha's electromagnetic specter, but something far more insidious, the ruthless logic of industrial power, when untempered by conscience or compassion. "It is a phantom that walks in many houses throughout our great city, my dear fellow, and is best laid not by scientific apparatus or legal proceedings, but by the simple application of justice and human decency." He took up his violin with that same fluid motion, drawing the bow once across the strings to produce a quiet, aching melody that seemed to mourn both what had perished and what might yet be redeemed. Outside our windows, the London fog pressed against the panes like a thwarted spectator, while within, the fire burned, steadily, casting dancing shadows that held no terror, only the comfortable mysteries of home and friendship. "The Iron Widow's final performance has concluded," Holmes murmured, his music filling the room with melancholy beauty. "Her electromagnetic ghost has been exorcised through scientific inquiry rather than supernatural intervention, and her victims, both living and dead, may finally find the peace that mechanical ingenuity and human ambition had denied them." As the violin's sweet lament continued into the night, I reflected upon the extraordinary case that had demonstrated once again my friend's unparalleled ability to illuminate the darkest corners of human nature through the clear light of logical deduction. The ghost of the Iron Widow would trouble Blackwood Manor no more, but the lessons of her elaborate conspiracy would linger long in my memory, a testament to both the heights of scientific achievement and the depths of moral corruption that could spring from the same brilliant mind. The haunting melody of Holmes's violin had scarcely faded when Mrs. Hudson's familiar footsteps announced a visitor ascending our 17 steps with evident urgency. Holmes lowered his instrument with that fluid grace that marked all his movements, his grey eyes already sharpening with anticipation as Inspector Lestrade entered bearing a leather portfolio that bore the official seal of Scotland Yard. "Gentlemen," Lestrade began, settling into his customary chair with barely concealed excitement, "the Blackwood Manor case has yielded one final revelation that completes our understanding of Lady Agatha's posthumous conspiracy. We apprehended Pemberton, attempting to break into the evidence room at Scotland Yard, seeking to destroy what he believed were duplicate photographic plates." Holmes's expression sharpened with that predatory intensity I had come to associate with his most brilliant deductions. "Indeed, and what drove our faithful butler to such desperate measures?" From his portfolio, Lestrade produced a cracked envelope bearing Lady Agatha's iron rose seal. Pemberton confessed to receiving this letter, which he believed contained his mistress's final instructions. The handwriting appeared authentic, directing him to place the locket where panic would carry it to safety, and to recover any duplicated evidence should the police interfere. Holmes examined the envelope with his magnifying glass, his keen nose detecting the subtle differences that had escaped the butler's devoted loyalty, lavender wax rather than Lady Agatha's customary clove, and observed the terminal flourish upon the letter G distinctly, Larcher's hand attempting to imitate his mistress's angular script. Our secretary orchestrated every aspect of this conspiracy, manipulating even the household staff through forged correspondence. "Poor Pemberton," I murmured, recalling the man's evident distress throughout our investigation. 30 years of faithful service, only to be deceived by the very loyalty he sought to honor. The investigation into Lady Agatha's industrial empire has revealed the true scope of her documentation, Lestrade continued, producing a collection of photographs bearing the distinctive clarity of her photographic reduction technique. The brass key from the Iron Rose opened a safety deposit box containing comprehensive evidence of industrial corruption, spanning 20 years, unsafe working conditions, deliberately concealed from government inspectors, systematic embezzlement from workers' pension funds, and correspondence proving that Sir Erasmus knew of these dangers months before the Hartwell disaster. Holmes studied the images with growing gravity, his expression reflecting both admiration for Lady Agatha's thoroughness and disgust at the industrial empire's callous disregard for human life. "Remarkable foresight," he observed. "She understood that knowledge, properly preserved, and strategically deployed, represented power far exceeding mere financial control. The charitable trust has already begun operations," Lestrade added with evident satisfaction. "Miss Eleanor Vance, possessing considerable administrative experience from her work with industrial reform societies, has agreed to serve as director. The irony is not lost. The young woman whose romance triggered Lady Agatha's revenge now implements the Iron Widow's vision of industrial reform." "And Horace Rook?" Holmes inquired with uncharacteristic concern. The documents suggesting his sister's embezzlement were indeed forgeries. She has been restored to her position with full compensation, while Mr. Rook himself has been offered employment by the trust, overseeing safety equipment installation at the reformed facilities. As evening shadows lengthened across Baker Street, Holmes returned to his position before the fireplace, his lean figure silhouetted against the dancing flames. The comfortable disorder of our sitting room newspapers scattered across the Persian carpet, chemical apparatus gleaming on the side table, seemed to offer blessed relief after the calculated terrors of Blackwood Manor. "It is a curious thing, Watson," Holmes mused, his grey eyes reflecting the firelight with philosophical intensity. "How human ambition can twist even the most brilliant of minds. Lady Agatha's intellect, her mastery of electromagnetic science, ultimately served to perpetuate her control even from beyond the grave. Yet, perhaps, in the end, her posthumous revenge achieved something greater than personal vindication. The reform of an industrial system that had claimed countless lives through deliberate negligence." He moved to examine the iron rose upon our mantelpiece one final time, its metallic petals still bearing faint traces of phosphorescent residue. The true ghost in this affair was not Lady Agatha's electromagnetic specter, but something far more insidious, the ruthless logic of industrial power when untempered by conscience or compassion. It is a phantom that walks in many houses throughout our great city, my dear fellow, and is best laid not by scientific apparatus or legal proceedings, but by the simple application of justice and human decency. Taking up his violin once more, Holmes drew the bow across the strings to produce a quiet, hopeful melody that seemed to celebrate both what had been redeemed and what might yet be achieved. "The Iron Widow's final performance has concluded," he murmured, his music filling the room with renewed purpose. "Her electromagnetic ghost has been exorcised through scientific inquiry, and her victims, both living and dead, may finally find the peace that mechanical ingenuity and human ambition had denied them." 3 weeks after our return from Blackwood Manor, the Morning Post brought final confirmation of justice served and mysteries resolved. Holmes examined the official correspondence from Scotland Yard with evident satisfaction while I settled into my familiar chair beside the fireplace, where Lady Agatha's iron rose had rested these past days, like some conquered trophy of scientific deduction. "Most gratifying, Watson," Holmes announced, folding the letter with characteristic precision. "Felix Larch has been sentenced to transportation for life, his conspiracy having been judged as calculated murder disguised by supernatural theatre." The judge observed that the deliberate exploitation of electromagnetic science to induce cardiac failure represented criminal sophistication requiring appropriate legal severity. He moved to the window, gazing upon Baker Street's familiar bustle with that contemplative expression marking his most profound observations. "The final technical details have proven most illuminating. My compass needle's erratic behavior near Sir Erasmus's desk confirmed the presence of powerful electromagnetic fields. Fields that Larch enhanced far beyond Lady Agatha's original specifications. The metallic particles scattered throughout the study were not mere iron dust, but a precise alloy of iron and nickel chosen specifically for superior ferromagnetic properties." "And the portrait's significance?" I inquired, recalling that deliberate slash across Lady Agatha's painted throat. "Elementary," Holmes replied with satisfaction. The cut engaged a concealed mechanism within the wainscoting, a master switch that activated the entire electromagnetic apparatus. Only when Lady Agatha's image was symbolically wounded would her spectre walk. Larch's theatrical flourish served a practical purpose, though he likely never realized how completely it betrayed his involvement. A knock interrupted our discussion, admitting Inspector Lestrade, accompanied by Miss Eleanor Vance. She carried herself with quiet dignity, her mourning attire replaced by practical dress that spoke of administrative responsibility, rather than romantic sorrow. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said with evident gratitude, "I bring news of the charitable trust's remarkable progress. The reformed factories report not a single serious accident since implementing Lady Agatha's safety protocols. Her electromagnetic apparatus, properly employed, now provides electrical safety training throughout England's industrial heartland. Holmes inclined his head with characteristic courtesy. The credit belongs to Lady Agatha's vision, Miss Vance, however distorted it became through personal bitterness. Her scientific genius, freed from vengeance's constraints, now protects the very workers her industrial empire had previously endangered. Horace Rook has proven invaluable, she continued. His mechanical expertise, no longer coerced by false accusations, serves to design safer machinery for the northern foundries. Even Pemberton has found purpose assisting with administrative duties, his loyalty redirected toward righteous causes. As our visitors departed, Holmes settled into his chair with that satisfied expression marking successful case conclusions. The comfortable disorder of our Baker Street quarters offered blessed sanctuary after electromagnetic ghosts and posthumous conspiracies, yet I sensed the lessons would linger long in our memories. "It is remarkable, Holmes," I observed, "how scientific genius, when corrupted by personal ambition, creates elaborate instruments of destruction, yet properly directed, the same knowledge preserves human life." Holmes took up his pipe with familiar ritual, the flame illuminating his sharp features. "The true mystery, Watson, was not how Lady Agatha's ghost walked among the living, but how the living allowed industrial negligence to claim countless lives while remaining willfully blind to preventable dangers. Her electromagnetic specter was merely theater. The real haunting lay in systematic indifference to worker safety that her posthumous conspiracy finally exposed." He struck another match, pipe smoke curling contemplatively. Felix Larch believed he served Lady Agatha's memory by transforming psychological torture into immediate murder. But he fundamentally misunderstood her true genius. She comprehended that lasting change required not individual vengeance but systematic reform, a lesson her charitable trust now implements throughout England. The afternoon light faded beyond our windows as church bells tolled, with mechanical precision, reminding me of clockwork mechanisms that once filled Blackwood Manor with ghostly footsteps and supernatural terror. "The Iron Widow's final performance has concluded," Holmes murmured, pipe smoke spiraling toward the ceiling. "Her electromagnetic ghost has been exorcised through scientific inquiry, and her true legacy, industrial reform, achieved through practical application of scientific knowledge, will protect countless lives for generations to come." As evening settled upon Baker Street, I reflected upon this extraordinary case, demonstrating once again my friend's unparalleled ability to illuminate human nature's darkest corners through logical deduction's clear light. The ghost of the Iron Widow would trouble no dreams, but her conspiracy's lessons would endure testament to both scientific achievement's heights and moral corruption's depths, springing from the same brilliant mind, and justice's ultimate triumph over vengeance, knowledge over ignorance, human compassion over industrial indifference.